for as long as I can remember, I've been a Star Wars fan. I can't remember when I first fell in love with that galaxy far, far away, but I do remember exactly when that love was lost. It was December 31st, 2019, New Year's Eve. I had put it off for long enough, and I could put it off for no longer. After hearing nothing but horror stories for weeks, I finally sat down to watch Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker with my family in tow. When it was over, I stood up, sighed, and walked sullenly out of the theater. I had been one of the few people who liked the previous installment of the sequel trilogy, whose name needs no introduction. I had been one of the few who was excited by the risks it took, excited by how big it was willing to swing, excited by how it and its creator seemed to think that the most respectful thing one could do with the story of a galaxy far, far away was to do something new. To watch the films I loved backpedal on their creative complexities so unabashedly to appease the most vocally virulent sect of their fanbase while simultaneously abandoning the cast and creatives to face the aftermath of that vitriol was a cause for profound disillusionment. So, after the Rise of Skywalker, I went back home. I quietly turned on the TV and watched the ball drop. I didn't go online, I didn't froth at the mouth or fume about how my childhood was dead and the franchise was ruined forever. I didn't like it very much, but that was okay. It was just a movie, and it was a movie I didn't care much to think about, ever again. Pretty soon, I would have other, more pressing matters to concern myself with anyways. Star Wars had been the only reason I even fell in love with movies at all, and the reason I sought to expand my palette, the reason I became so enamored with the art form. In 2019, it was all I could think about. In 2020, I never thought about it again. Half a decade later, however, and something very curious happened. I began to hear whispers through the wills, the curious change in the air. Star Wars, rumor had it, was good again. And it was on television. In the time that had elapsed, I had completely divested myself from my fandom in Star Wars. It was no longer something holy or sacred to me. Now I saw it not as an all-encompassing monolith of pop culture, but rather as just another movie. This perspective, I believed, had been lost as Star Wars dominated the cultural landscape, and now that its influence was on the wane and its empire was in ruins, it was easy to see how what we now call A New Hope had begun as a host unto itself, not Episode 4, but a singular one, just a highly ambitious work of romantic science fiction space opera inspired by Stanley Kubrick, Pierre Christine, and Frank Herbert. Star Wars was just a movie, I thought, a uniquely cinematic vision, and it should be treated as such. But I had seen stills. I had heard spoilers, brief but vague, whispers from the dark. And I was hard-pressed to deny that I was starting to feel that old feeling again, foreign but familiar, that charge, that excitement, that feeling only Star Wars could bring. So, making every effort to temper my expectations and swallow my anticipation, one night in June I sat down on a whim with both of my brothers and began to watch Andor, a prequel series to establish the origins of a character that had already been killed off in 2016's Rogue One. 42 minutes later, as the credits rolled, without even shutting the TV off, I walked away from the living room and put my head in my hands. In just one episode, I had been made, against my will, to care about Star Wars again, and I was incredibly mad about it. I tried to fight it, I tried to fend it off, but by the end of episode 3, I could no longer deny it. I was hooked. And the reason Andor resonated with me so deeply was because it evoked one of my favorite themes in the entire franchise, a motif that began all the way back in my favorite Star Wars movie of all time, The Empire Strikes Back. And that motif, simply put, is that failure is the greatest teacher of all. No, seriously, think about how many times our heroes fail throughout Episode 5. We open on a scene of profound failure and desolation, Luke lost in the ice on Hoth at the mercy of the Wampa and on the verge of freezing to death. The rebellion fails to defend its old base on Yavin and are summarily forced to flee from their new one. The Falcon's hyperdrive fails, and Han and Chewie fail to repair it. Han makes the mistake of putting his trust in Lando, and Lando makes the mistake of putting his trust in the Empire to protect his people. Luke fails to lift the X-Wing from the swamp, and makes the mistake of journeying to Cloud City before his training is complete. He fails to defeat Vader, he fails to fight back the seductive influence of the dark side, he loses his arm, he loses the father he never knew he had in the span of a single instant, he loses his entire concept of self. Empire is unrelentingly dark, and yet the movie draws to a close with our heroes gazing out at the stars with no choice but to continue. Because he failed to defeat Vader, Luke comes to understand him, and this gives him the strength to reject the Emperor in the end. Lando's failure inspires him to fight for the rebellion and ends up saving Han's life in the end. Everyone is tested by the events of Empire, but this brush with failure, no matter how narrowly escaped, is formative, and it makes our heroes stronger for it in the end. The Last Jedi, to me, was another Star Wars movie about choices and mistakes. Countless times throughout the story, its central characters make choices. Sometimes they're right, but for the wrong reasons. Sometimes they're wrong, but for the right reasons. Sometimes the choices themselves are wrong. Sometimes the choices are made for them. But what sets the light and dark apart at the end of the day in Ryan's eyes is that one side chooses to learn from their mistakes. The other refuses. Was Holdo refusing to tell Poe her plan a mistake? Maybe, but not to her. To Holdo, the First Order having tracked the Resistance fleet through hyperspace was cause for the gravest of concern. There was possibility of a mole on board the ship, someone feeding information to the opposition. They were dwarfed by the scale of the enemy's onslaught, and she couldn't trust the flyboy who just very transparently flouted the chain of command and completely crippled their already meager fighting force. But if Holdo trusted Poe from the start, Poe never would have learned the lessons he needed to become a leader. And if he never became a leader, he never would have found the strength to show faith in Finn. Was Finn planning to desert the Resistance a mistake? Maybe, but not to him. To Finn, he had spent an entire lifetime ground down under the heel of the First Order, and had wanted to do nothing more than to escape it, and save the one person who had shown him kindness and humanity. But if Finn hadn't been planning to flee, he never would have found DJ, and in turn, he never would have found his own voice by realizing that the great evil of his time could not be avoided. Not joining is never an option, and it's never truly freedom, because silence is tantamount to complicity. You have to take a side, any side, and take a stand on the side of the light. And Finn never would have found that cause worth fighting for without Rose. Was Rose saving Finn a mistake? Maybe, but not to her. To Rose, this was the only chance she had to save someone she loved, to tell them how she felt, even if she didn't totally know what that feeling was. A chance she never had with her sister, Paige, who was taken from her before she even got to say hello, much less goodbye. But if Rose didn't stop Finn from taking out the battering ram, the door wouldn't have been blown open for Luke Skywalker to walk through, with nothing but a laser sword to face down the entire First Order. And that one image of noble self-sacrifice wouldn't have set the imagination of the galaxy ablaze and burnt the last petulant remnants of the Empire down. Luke was wrong for failing Ben. Ashamed that he had succumbed to the darkness, ashamed that he had allowed it to fester once more than his family, too beaten and bitter by time in a way we all invariably become, he sealed himself off from the Force and fled. Rey was wrong, Kylo was wrong, countless times through The Last Jedi, its characters fail and fall, but what separates light and dark is that the former chooses to listen to the lessons failure teaches, and the latter stubbornly refuses. And ironically, despite it being one of my favorite films, when watching The Last Jedi, what I failed to realize was that I had been wrong too, in the same way Ben Solo was. I thought the past needed to die, needed to be killed. I thought the only way to become what I was meant to be was to let go of Star Wars altogether, convinced it had no place left not only in my life, but in the cinematic landscape altogether. I thought it had been beaten back into craven creative cowardice. I thought its story no longer mattered. Andor showed me I was wrong. Ryan's focus on Star Wars is much more spiritual. To me, at least, he was the perfect writer, director, and creative for the interrogation and subsequent interpretation of the Force that the sequel trilogy truly needed to become something more, and I so wish it had the courage to stay that course. Tony Gilroy, on the other hand, showrunner of Andor, represents a kind of Star Wars secularism. He was much better equipped to tackle the politics of the Empire and its authoritarian crawl across the stars in a manner that translates instantly as realistic. Both of these things have their place, and both of them are Star Wars. Both facets are interwoven strands of the singular story George Lucas wanted to tell. And the thing that unites both these disparate facets of what makes Star Wars, is that motif of choice and failure. Andor is bookended by two such impossible choices that exist in parallel, one to open the show in Season 1 and the latter to close it in Season 2. These are central choices, the crux of Andor's moral philosophy, the decisions around which every other choice in the show orbits. I am, of course, referring to Maarva Andor abducting Cassa from Kenari, and Luthen smuggling Kleya away from the massacre that engulfed her homeworld. But was Maarva saving Cassa a mistake? Was Luthen saving Kleya? Cassian lost his sister, his home, his people, his culture. He grew up deprived of these things, and yet there is no denying that Maarva did the best she could to shield him from the onslaught of the Empire. She told him what little she knew of his home, never made any attempts to deny his heritage or his pain. She loved him like a son, and he loved her like a mother. He grew up in a loving family with a father and a brother, and Ferrix became his home too, stone and sky. The choice was made for Maarva. The choice itself was wrong. It wasn't fair. It was a split-second decision to her between stranding Cassian and surely leaving him to die, or causing him unfathomable anguish at the loss of the only world he had ever known. Luthen's dilemma, on the other hand, only occurred after he adopted Kleya. He honed her pain, her rage, turned her into an instrument of the cause, trained her for the fight she was desperate for, and in so doing, denied her any hope of living another life, a better one not defined by the struggle and her strife. But what choice did he have other than to offer her that choice? What else could they have become at the end of the lives they had lived? They loved each other in their own quiet way, in the sort of way only two such seriously stunted people could. And every other choice in the series stems from these two, every voice a variation between love and loss, love and the lack of it. Was Bix leaving Cassian a mistake? History would disagree. After all, had she not, Cassian Andor never could have secured the Death Star plans at the cost of his life, and the Alliance would have been obliterated. But Andor brilliantly divorces these actions from the cosmic coincidences that stem from them, allows us to view them not merely as operatic tropes within the context of the Star Wars saga, but as complex individuals, burdened by the weight of their own private lives. Was Luthen backing the Gorman resistance a mistake? It galvanized Mon Mothma into finally formally joining the Alliance in a public outcry that even the Emperor couldn't suppress. It burnt brightly, as he hoped it would, turning its smoldering remains into a beacon for belligerents across the galaxy. It was barbaric, yes, but the man he sent to the planet to assassinate Dedra Meero never even fired the first shot that sparked the massacre. It was a false flag by the Empire, a targeted sacrifice, picking baby-faced troopers that were green around the gills to give the galaxy martyrs to mourn. And all the while, heedless of the lives of their own, the Imperial assault upon Gorman continued. The genocide of the Gore would have proceeded no matter what. So was it better then to go down swinging? There are no easy answers to these questions. This is by design. This is, after all, a war. These are flawed, deeply imperfect, deeply human characters, perhaps some of the most painstakingly realized in the history of Star Wars. Sometimes they make the wrong choice, sometimes the choices themselves are wrong, unfair, but they try their best to carry on regardless. And, in spite of it all, they love each other. It's the love they fight for, ultimately. It's what makes them fight as hard as they do. Sometimes the love isn't enough. Sometimes they're forced to choose duty instead, or swallow it and set it aside. But the love they have for each other is still there. It's still real. It still matters, even if no one sees it. The reason the portrayal of this love must be so exacting throughout the entirety of Andor is to demonstrate what is forged in its absence. There is no love lost in the Empire. Rather, love is a currency, a resource to be exploited. Dedra exploits Cyril's position in the Bureau to infiltrate Gorman and perpetrate the Empire's scheme to raise the planet in a systematic genocide and culling for deep substrate foliated calcite. Bad luck Gorman, bad luck Karn. Every hand of the Imperial Hun lies to itself, refuses to believe that the face-eating Nexu party will throw them into the bloody sands of the Geonosian arena next. Cyril's lie is that it's justified, as always taking the form of outside agitators. When he sees Cassian in the crowd, he forgoes all reason. He forgets the betrayal he's suffered or the horrors of the Gorman massacre all around him, surrenders completely to his hatred, and channels it all into the mythical Cassian Andor as a singular scapegoat for what he knows are his own sins. There's a perverse sort of catharsis to this toxic, self-destructive wrath, one the Imperial thought machine preys upon. Ultimately, Cyril gains the upper hand, as the brutes so often do. He has Cassian between his sights, but just before he pulls the trigger, he hesitates. The light goes out behind his eyes, and he loses all will to fight when he realizes that Cassian can't even recognize him. And, if I might be so bold, it's because Karn was fighting to destroy what he hates. Cassian is fighting to save what he loves. Cyril was consumed with thoughts of Cassian Andor every day since Ferrix. Cassian never once thought about him at all. Cyril Karn was dead before he hit the ground. He died a long time ago. Those who sell their soul to the death cult of fascism never truly live. The only thing that binds them together is their disgust for that which they fail to understand and refuse to accept. Oppression is the mask of fear. Oppression masks the fear the Imperial Guards felt on the slave labor planet of Narkina 5, understaffed and outnumbered countless times over by the imprisoned populace. They were desperate to suppress and conceal this fact through elaborate showmanship in the hopes that no one realized how brittle their fist of authority truly was. And it was during Narkina 5 that I realized what Andor truly meant. Why Andor? I stayed up with my siblings to watch all 4 episodes in that arc in the span of a single night in our own private act of rebellion. And as I looked over at my littlest brother, I saw the light in his eyes. I saw the feeling striking him like lightning, and I realized, with awe, that he was learning something for the very first time watching the show. I suddenly remembered why Star Wars still matters. Much has been made of the parallels between Andor and the realities of our current geopolitical climate. Much scorn and derision has been cast upon those whose political consciousness was newly awakened by Andor's interpretation of those events. But to that, I have to ask, aren't you tired of fighting with people who agree with you? Does it matter what it takes to bring them into the fold, bring everyone together? Andor doesn't think so. The raid on Aldhani was pulled off by a Chandrilan Nepo baby, a leftist revolutionary, an Imperial defector, a spy master soldier, a double agent, a con man, and a thief-turned-mercenary. None of them even particularly liked one another or believed in the same things, but they pulled together, forged a coalition of common interests for the common good, and succeeded in funding the entire alliance to restore the Republic in the span of a single, suicidal heist. So does it really matter if the first manifesto you ever heard was Nemmik's? Does it matter if you see the fate of Gaza and the Gore or the other way around? Everyone has to start somewhere, no matter how young. Perhaps it's silly and infantile, a symptom of a particularly American conception of cultural arrested development that such stories are even needed to instruct us in empathy at all. But we can't change the fact that they are needed thanks to the rot at the core of our culture, nor can we discount the tremendous effort they expend to unravel the propaganda that permeates our everyday lives. Everyone's hunkered down in Yavin anyways. Might as well fight to win. Might as well fight together. This is why Star Wars still matters, because it shows the very young and the very small amongst us the way. It's a grand operatic adventure, yes, and that's why we fall in love with it, but maybe if we really listen to what it has to say, it can show us something we didn't even know about ourselves. The galaxy of Star Wars and the stories contained within it are more alike than anyone even realizes, and that's because it's all the same story, just told in different ways for different times. Cassian and Han served together in the mud on Mimibon. The former was an Imperial conscript serving out his prison sentence. The latter had no choice but to enlist the service to escape the nightmarish cyclical poverty and crime on his homeworld. Luke's dream was to join the Imperial Navy, then defect to the Alliance. Finn was a child soldier abducted by the First Order and brainwashed by his circumstances into complete subservience and slavery. We don't always get it right the first time, and it takes time to find what we're fighting for. Even our heroes fail, fall, make mistakes. They're as fallible as we are, and that makes it all the more powerful when they find their way again. But no matter where we come from, no matter how small or insignificant we are, we can still make a difference. We are not defined by our blood, but by our bonds, by the choices we make in the time we have and the company we hold close in the darkest of times. George was right all those years ago. Star Wars really is like poetry. It rhymes. A once optimistic visionary young man grows resentful of the holy text with which he has been saddled. Distrustful and depressed, he musters up the courage to let go and passes the mantle to the next generation. And one torch lights another, setting an entire galaxy ablaze. Because what it's all about are the children holding brooms and sweeping their garages, grabbing the handles by the hilt, and imagining that they're somewhere, anywhere else. Star Wars is one of the most beautifully laid-bare depictions of the monomyth in all of blockbuster cinema. If you live for long enough, you'll see the same eyes in different people. Cassian, Luke, Rey, Han, even Anakin, they share the same eyes, the same souls longing for something more, their gaze cast toward the sunset, staring out into the stars beyond. They and their stories are all the same, part of the story, part of Star Wars. And if you hear their stories told back to front, round and round, recited in a circle, they all become one. The singular Star Wars. Life surrounds us and binds us, but size matters not. There will be times when the struggle seems impossible, alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy, but freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection, no matter how small, are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. And then there will be one too many. One single thing will flood the banks of the Empire and break the siege. Do or do not, there is no try, so remember this, try. Do your best to try your hardest to wake up early and fight those bastards from the very start with your last dying breath. Fight them to save what you love, fight them and fail. Lose over and over and over again. The greatest teacher failure is. So burn yourself for sunrise you'll know you'll never live to see. Use up all the perfect you have left in exchange for some small sliver of good. Give it all at once to something real rather than dying slowly piece by piece. Learn everything you can and then grow up. Move on. Let go. And take the fight with you. This is what we grow beyond. Luminous beings we are, not this crude matter. Andor is Star Wars, and exactly why Star Wars still matters. Because these are movies about space wizards for children, yes, but that's what they need to be. That's who they're for. This singular story must be preserved, kept alive, shared with the next generation, and it must take a form they can understand, speak to them in the parlance of their own times, show them the naked face oppression will take for their own generation. Sometimes Star Wars is crude and cruel and insipid, but this is necessary. This is so that the suits are blinded by the statistics of historical box office returns and intellectual property and marketability, but deep down, the children know. They always know. Truly wonderful the mind of a child is. They know without ever being told by hearing only a low, lonesome horn and the sight of twin suns at sunset. Star Wars is about freedom. Freedom and the fight for it. Freedom for everyone and everything everywhere, no matter the cost. Star Wars is what we grow beyond, and so it must always be there to be grown beyond for the next generation. And that is how Andor convinced me Star Wars still matters. Because Star Wars isn't always good, but when Star Wars is good, it's great. And when Star Wars is great, there's nothing better. Nothing. I'm Frostbyte Freeman, and until next time, stay frosty.